Dr. Sandesh Kumar Singh, sir.
Yeah,
I'll hand over the floor to you, sir. Thank you, sir.
thank you, Nimesh. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Yeah. So, first of all, I would like to thank the organizing team and definitely allowing us to be part of this great international event, which is going on in last since last 2 3 days. Actually, this is I think last day. 27 we have started and this is 29th, so we are going to conclude today this international convention. And in last 3 days I would say like we have several presentations on different aspects of present scenario, which have included theory, practice and everything. So in that context I could say it is one of the best and successful event. And at the same time I extend my heartiest congratulations to nice team who are playing vital role in basically organizing such event last throughout the year. Actually, I'm just asking because this is what I have observed. This is not easy task to know organizing webinars, lecture series or conventions and conclaves like this in every now and then, but they are doing so. In that context, this is inspiration for us and definitely a motivation for us too, because we are at the same time here I would like to mention another point, like they are not only inviting basically world's great personalities, but also they are providing place to young budding scholars who are coming up in this international relations field, in this basically foreign affairs uh, issues. So i- that is what we have to learn actually. Why I'm asking this, because we all are in that field. We all are having that plan to organize conferences, webinars, talks, workshops, conventions. So I'm saying this is not only to share our ideas. This is something we have to learn, not only basically this knowledge field. At the same time, we have to learn how to organize conferences, how to keep best mind engaged in basically deliberations, dialogues on different international issues. So with these, uh, just we are just few we have few important instructions for paper presenters who are going to speak in this webinar. Like, since we have been given only 60 minutes, we have to conclude within that. So this is first point, we have to be careful in time management, because that's very important while you present, while you make any ppt to present. Basically, when you make your mind to speak on a topic, you have to frame that within given time. So in that context I would say you have 8 to 10 minutes to speak maximum. Just I'm saying try to conclude in 7 to 8 minutes, but you if you want to go beyond that, you can take 2 minutes, because if we all are speaking in that time, it will be like 45 to 50 minutes. The rest, or 15 to 10 to 15 minutes, will be for discussion. If we get any question, any queries from audiences or listeners, definitely we would love to listen them. So in that context I would say please try to restrict yourself with basically time schedule. And we are having 5 speakers on who are going to share their views on different 5 different topics, which are very relevant. And the theme of our presentation and this session is like non-traditional security issues, which is one of the important and vital issue, because this is the time we are experiencing COVID-19, and this is what called basically a non-traditional threat. And the entire world is witnessing, not basically a particular country. This is not something happening as in the case of SARS was very much restricted with particular region, countries. But in the case of COVID-19, all the countries across the globe are experiencing the problem and threat, basically threat. So in that context, the importance not non-traditional security issues are growing, is evolving. So we are eager to hear your observations, your presentations on different aspects of non-traditional security issues. With these words, I'm hoping we are going to enjoy this session. We are going to get a lot of new ideas, views. So with this, I'm going to invite the first speaker of the session, Dr. Abhay Kumar, who is going to speak basically conceptualizing security in the discourse of international relations. He is an assistant professor in Department of Political Science, Banaras Hindu University, BHU, and which is a very known university, basically. And personally, he is known to me, and I know he is good scholar, and we are going to enjoy him. Dr. Abhay Kumar.
Thank you very much. Am I audible to all of you?
Yeah.
No, thank you. Good evening to all of you. The purpose of my presentation to conceptualize the security in the discourse of international relations. During the Cold War, if you will try to conceptualize the concept, for that we have to go in the during the Cold War. The dominant approach with the security studies may be approximately summarized advocating the political realism, which preoccupied with the 4S, like states, strategy, science, and the status quo. It was the focus on the state so much as they were considered to be both the most important agent and the referent of the security in the international politics. It was about the strategy in so much as their core intellectual and the political concern revolve around the best means of employing the threat and the use of military force. And it aspired the scientific in so much count as the authentic objective knowledge. It's based on the scientific experiences, as opposed to the opinion analyzed were expected to adopt method copied the natural science as physics and chemistry, and only and the last one, the status quo. In so much the great powers and majority of the academicians who work within the understood security policy as the preventing radical and revolutionary change within the security politics. The Barry Bujan has written a book, People, State and Fear, all are known. The fundamentally undermined at least two of the 4S of traditional security studies. In particular, the Bujan argues the security was not just about the state, but related to all human collectivities, nor could be the confined to the inherently inadequate focus of the military force. Bujan developed a framework in which argued that security of the human collectivities was affected by the factor in the five major sectors, which had its own focal point and a way of ordering the priorities, like first military, second political, and third the economic, and fourth the societal, and the last one the environmental. Of course, he was trying to expand the bottom of security. Of course, there was the limitation of Bujan framework also, not at least the lack of attention paid to the gender dimension of the security and the and the philosophical foundation of the field. In the both area, he just failed. In the particular, its dominant epistemology. In a sense, if we try to understand, we'll try to conceptualize the concept of security in the IR, then we have to look the problem and analyze and solution that IR cannot provide alone. Scholars therefore look the insight into the wide variety of the discipline, not only those within the humanity or social science. For example, analyzing the issue related to the weapon of mass destruction requires the degree of scientific and the technical knowledge. Understanding the post-terrorism will involve a psychological dimension. Assessing the health risk requires some access to the medical expertise. Understanding the environmental degradation involves engaging the biology and the environmental history, while combining the transnational crime will necessarily involve the close relationship with the criminology. In a sense, if we try to really conceptualize the concept, that we have to ask the four fundamental question, that what is the fundamental question, that first one, what is the security in IR, and the second one, the whose security are we talking about, and and third one, what count as a security issues, and the last, how can security be achieved. If my paper is able to answer all these four questions, then we will be able to understand to some extent that how could we conceptualize the security. In a sense, what security means, realize the issue about the philosophy, knowledge, especially the concerning the epistemology, how do you know the things are, what phenomena do you think make up the social world, or how should we study the social world. In a sense, security is most commonly associated with the elevation of threat or CS value, especially those which is left unchecked threaten the survival or particular referent object in the near future. It means it's very much clear that security and survival are often related but not the synonyms. In a sense, where survival is the essential condition, security involves the ability to pursue the chair's political and social ambitions. Security is therefore best understood as in the word of what Ken Booth has called the survival plus. The plus is being freedom from life determining threat and therefore some life choices. In a sense, we could say the true prevalent philosophy of the security, each emerging from the fundamental different point. If you put in the different way, that the possibility to identify the true prevalent philosophy of the security, uh, each emerging from the fundamental different starting point. First philosophy sees security as a being virtually synonymous with the accumulation of power. And for this purpose, security is understood as a commodity. Secure, in a sense, property, money, weapon, armies, and basically the traditional security. And the second philosophy challenges the idea that security flows from the power. Instead, security is being based on the emancipation. It means equality and justice for all, that is concerned with the justice and provision of human rights. From this perspective, security understood relationship between the different actors rather than the commodity. Like if we will take the example of nuclear weapon, that we could understand to what extent the relationship security involved gaining the degree of confidence about the relationship that come through the sharing certain commitment, which turn provide a degree of reassurance and predictability. That is not particular commodity that are the crucial factor like nuclear weapon understanding the security and security equation, but rather than the relationship between the concern, like how the US perceived about the nuclear security, which was US decision maker think Iran possession of nuclear weapon would be the source of considerable insecurity. They do not feel that same way that the nuclear arsenal held by the India or Pakistan. In a sense, if we just try to understand security, then we must achieve the security not against the adversary but together with him. It means Palm argued that must rest on the commitment to join the survival rather than threat of mutual destruction. This is the what is the meaning of security. And the second relevant thing that food security we are talking about, if asked food security we are talking about, the next important and unavoidable step in the analytical process without the deciding the referent object can be no there can be no threat or no discussion about the security, because the concept is meaningless without the something to secure. We need to clear about the referent object our analysis, whether we are analyzing the state, we are analyzing the individual, or we are analyzing the society. That what are the main concern for the in the long shape human history, the central focus of security has been people, as noted. However, within the academics, security has focused the state, even specifically it was focused particular the conception of the national interest, national security. If we'll ask the another question, food security should be talking about? Not surprising, therefore, debate continue range over who and what should constitute the ultimate reference object for the security. For the many decades, dominant answer was that when thinking about the security, international politics state were the most important reference object. But if you try to conceptualize, we are trying to analyze, then we have to focus rather than the state, an individual like a society. That should be the case. It means if we are deciding the human security, according to the popular definition, human security is not concerned with the weapon; it is concerned with the human dignity. The third approach concept of the society has the most important reference object for the security study, because the human do not always view the group interest or collectivities in purely instrumental terms rather than human in the part of scientific social group, specific social group. If we try to analyze, then we have to approach the question of level of analysis of an analytical framework, thinking from the lowest level, the individual, through the various source collective interest, including the bureaucracy, state, region, civilization, right at the level of the international system. The task of analyst was to focus the unavoidable relationship tension between the different level of analysis. These are the basic concerns which we should address it. And what is the security issue? Ask the count the security issues for the particular reference. This involves analyzing the process through which the threat agenda are constructed. In other words, who decide which are referent objects shares value are threatened by what are. This is the very important aspect. Uh, in a sense, every thinking individual on the planet operate within the unique set of the security priorities, set in the part of factors such as their sex, gender, age, religion, beliefs, class, race, nationality, as well as where they are from and where they want to go and what they want to see happen in the future. In a sense, and the last, my question, how can security be achieved? If you want to answer this thing, then how the security might be achieved implies not only that we know what security means, what is look like in a different part of the world, but also therefore are the particular actor which through their consigned effort can save the future desired way. In a sense, how we think about the security uh, and how we think the secure environment would entail will now ideally shape the security policy we advocate. Uh, Mostly analysis reject the idea of total absolute security as an illusion of human life involved in security and the risk on one side or the another. The particular issue, like what level of threat and actor willing to tolerate the before the taking the remedial actions, as the US government responses to the 9/11 demonstrate tolerance level can vary significantly in the light of event and the circumstances change. So if we address this kind of question, then we'll be able to analyze, we will be able to conceptualize the concept of security. So uh, since I hope my time is getting over, so I would like to just over my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Abhay. Thanks a lot.
Thank
you. And you have nicely elaborated the topic. And now I invite the second speaker of the session, Afzalur Rahman. He's assistant professor at University of Chittagong, and he's going to speak on basically combating the COVID-19 as non-traditional security threat, deconstructing the traditional versus non-traditional security debate. Afzalur Rahman.
So thank you very much, Honorable Chair, for giving me the floor. And I also expressing my deep gratitude to the NICE for giving me this wonderful opportunities to share my paper in here. So what I'm gonna do in here is I just try to use existing literatures of international relations to understand the COVID-19 through the lenses of non-traditional versus the traditional security debate, with keeping in mind some specific objectives, with framing some of my research questions. And also happy to receive the comments and valuable insight from the audience after the end of my presentations, and also methodology. So if I just go, if I just discuss from the very beginning, then I have to say that from the 1648 nation state, most of the cases concern about their protecting their territory from the foreign attacks. That is highly influenced by the traditional security, and less attention put on the non-traditional security, like health in specific term I'm talking about. So as a result, we are facing this unprecedented problem like COVID-19 today. And if I just review the very dominant literatures of international relations, like realist thinking, like Hans J. Morgan to E.S. Carr and Walls, all of them are fundamentally focused on anarchy and security dilemma. And most of them are trying to understand the security of the state from the lenses of traditional security concern. But what we see after the outbreak of COVID-19 in China, then we see the negligence of WHO very initially. I say they delayed to declare this health emergency, took 2 months. And most of the countries outside of China, they were not prepared at that time to manage this very, what I say, that unprecedented problem. And there is a mess in every country, except a few countries like China and other areas. So if we just analyze the literature that we find from the organizations like United Nations, we see that previously they give precautions that pandemic like COVID-19, like Ebola and other surge, and also chikungunya, and also these types of pandemic can be threat for the international peace and security. You see, there's a list of pandemic that we experienced before the COVID-19, like SARS, chikungunya, Zika, swine flu. Every time international community, including the neglected the argument that came from the World Health Organizations. Even there is also same types of virus outbreak in China in 2002 in Guangdong provinces. But international community mainly concentrated to the allocating more budget to the defenses and traditional security concern like military bases and other issues. Okay, so and specifically the concern, their concern was that it is kind of concentrated in some particular area of the world. Maybe it is concentrated in Africa, or maybe it is concentrated in Africa or China or any other else where it is outbreak. But COVID-19, kind of challenges all the traditional notions, and it globalized the virus from China to all over the world. Okay, so the fundamental objectives of my paper is to understand the impact of COVID-19 and the non-traditional security. Secondly, understand the level of threat it posed to the conventional narrative of traditional security. To some extent, I think that it surpassed the traditional concern of the state, like protecting their borders from the foreign attacks, from the common enemies, terrorism, and a lot of things. And thirdly, I just compare it through the historical lens within very short time since 1648. The number of questions that I put in my paper is how did pandemic become the security concern with the course of history, how a state dealt with all the time in terms of pandemic, and secondly, why do non-traditional security need more policy attentions in particularly, I say, international relations, and thirdly, what are the lawfuls of World Health Organizations combating the pandemic, and should all require revised uniform global law? In here, I just use one analogy that is interesting. You know what? After the end of the Second World War, United Nations form, and the main purpose of the United Nations is to kind of prevent the state not to engage in war, like First World War and Second World War. And I think that United Nations, since most of the cases are able to implement and impart its own policy, not to engage like in a total war like First World War and Second World War. So I think that is one success that we can apply in terms of global health governance, empowering the WHO in particular through their reform. And finally, how would countries govern the global pandemic like COVID if we face similar problem in future after 1 decade and 2 decades? What will be our strategy as a global community to tackle that types of pandemic? The methodology I followed in here is mostly secondary. I just follow the literatures of international relations and reviewed policies of World Health Organizations and other relevant organizations like United Nations. So move on to my main body of discussions. If I say the response of the World Health Organizations towards pandemic like COVID-19 in previous, most of the case, they focus on containment, not the prevention. So most of the time containment is dominated by the ad hoc and temporary policies. After the over the pandemic, then they're not aware about the threat that are coming from the non-traditional security like health. So this is the fundamental lawfuls. I think World Health Organization need to change the event from containment to the prevention. They need more preventive strategy rather than containment. So I can tell you in here that when United Nations take war on terror programs, then it is kind of preventive measures to contain the terrorism from the world. So from that experience of United Nations, World Health Organizations also can take preventive measures to curtail the pandemic like COVID-19 in future. Secondly, already shared the argument of United Nations when it was established. It was mainly to prevent the war, and majority of the time got success to prevent the total war like World War I and World War II. So what are the problem in WHO? Having a limited policy success and also debate of influence by some specific country. Even the COVID time, there is an allegations of WHO giving favor to the China, and these things continued. I think who need more accommodative policy towards every countries. So, for example, who have enlisted 6 emergency permissions of using the vaccine. They exclude the Russian one even. They also didn't give the permissions to the Indian vaccine, also domestic production vaccine. So I think we need more collective approach, give more avenues to everyone rather than giving some certain facilities to 1 and 2 countries. So the problem, another problem is who also having a problem of like talk, not to take any kind of policy that having a impact on the countries rather than they discuss the policies rather than getting financial support from other countries. Another issue is this problem challenges the notions of globalization that was a buzzword for last 2 decades. So all the countries shut down their border for the travelers, scientists and representatives. So this is a huge challenge. If we don't take immediate steps, then all the current steps taken by the government for their allocations of the military budget will be, I think, futile in future because of the challenges that are coming from the health. Okay, and secondly, we have to focus on the fundamental purpose of World Health Organizations. In 1948, there is a specific mention that the WHO was established to attainment by all people of highest possible level of health. So keep in mind this particular objectives, international community need a number of steps to implement this policy. Those steps are who must be changed their activities through the reform, and also they need to reform the international health law so that everyone can participate rather than not to bias to some specific global superpower like USA and China. And thirdly, we need more global cooperations, not international cooperations, to tackle this problem, to solve the upcoming problem. And fourth is we need global consciousness based on science and also the interactiveness of the every nation state. And finally, what I say that with this, I will conclude my speech. Well, we need more collective response, and that must be the global response, not the international response by every country, not wing to the divisions like Cold War. We see even in the pandemic, China having a divisions with the neighboring country like India. They have a problem in South China, and there is a game between US and China. I think we need to solve all this problem so that we can solve the upcoming problem like COVID-19 in future. With this, I just conclude in here. I again say thank you. If you have any comment, then I will really be. It will be really appreciated after the end of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Afzalur. Thank you. You have nicely concluded your presentation. Definitely, we'll have questions in the last, and I invite you all to prepare questions while we are having presentations from our panelists. And the next panelist is Dr. Salini Prasad. She is assistant professor in Tikaram Kanya College, Aligarh. This is going to speak on cyber security, growing challenge to India's national security. This is very, very important topic. As Government of India, I'm just quoting one of the example. While Modi took over the charge of India's Prime Ministership, he has having a very dedicated digital diplomacy wing within the Prime Minister's office. So that shows the prominent importance of this cyber security. That is very important debate. I invite Salini to deliver her presentation. Salini.
Okay, thank you, sir, for giving me an opportunity to speak on this forum. My topic is, as already sir has mentioned, cybersecurity, a growing challenge to India's national security. I have chosen this topic as we all know that in this new era, we all are very much dependent on information technology. So I just briefly tell you like what is the aim of my paper and what I'm going to present my paper. Like I will briefly discuss what is the concept of cybersecurity and about what are the various dangers and challenges to the India cybersecurity space. And in this I will also discuss like what type of people, I identify the people which are involved in this type of activities and what are the motives and intention to carry out cyber attacks. And last I will examine the various initiative comments by the Indian government at like what are the various policies and the initiative which has commenced by the Indian government to tackle cybersecurity at the state level. This, as sir has mentioned, that this topic is very much important. So I also want to speak like why this study is very much rational. First of all, we are so much dependent on digital communication, and so most of us we don't know that how we are prone to various cyber crimes and cyber hacking, which are very much and we are very much vulnerable to all the cyber crimes. So this has started posing a very serious threat to the Indian to our individual life also, and overall and to a larger scale to the Indian cyber security and to the international security also. So there is a need to study the problem and investigate like what are the recent challenges and how we will deal at the individual level also and at the national level also. Like as we have seen that government are more and shifting to the digital communication to e-governance base. So it's very important that the government should build up a strong defense capability and carve out a strong cyber counter-terrorism strategy to defend India's security. Research question is like briefly what I'm going to deal with, like what is cyber security and how it is emerged as a national security concern. What are the various cyber crimes and terrorist activities which are concerned for the India's national security, and how the Indian government is going to has cooperated at a national level to enable cyber security. What is cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is also an effective mean to counter any crime or terrorist activity which are occurring in the cyberspace and which are hampering or disrupting the government machineries. Like we can deal with the cyber crimes. Cyber crimes, we can start with the cyber crimes. Like what are cyber crimes? Cyber crimes are generally considered with that like when we are using cyber technology or cyber space to conduct any crime. Like you hack someone's computer, you send some viruses, or you do phishing, like you send some emails and some texts, and then by clicking all this you can steal their credit card details. So this all the these activities are like happening, and people are more prone to this. This is not like this can happen to this person and this can't happen to this person. Many people are using internet and they're using cyber technology, but they're not aware about the major cyber crimes which are conducting in this sphere. Then if you deal with one more step, then there's a term called cyber terrorism, and where the terrorist activities, they use cyberspace to conduct their cyberspace to conduct their terrorist activities. Like they use they use the cyber technology, cyberspace to recruit, to train, to spread any messages. So when at a larger scale, the main intention is to disrupt the government machinery. When the main intention is to destroy the national security concern. So cybercrime is like it's a difference of an intention. Cybercrime is when there's an individual gain, when you individual gain by doing some crimes in the cyberspace. But cyberterrorism on the larger scale, when you not only destroy individual life, but also you challenge the national security concerns of any country. Why cyberspace has become very much emerged as a major trend to use, because the internet is very cheap, as we know, and it's very feasible also. Every person, each and person, most of them, I think most of the person are there who use cyber internet, and they use cyberspace. So it is it is very cheap and very feasible. And then it is the activities which are conducted. It's like you can't know who is conducting. The face of the attacker is invisible. And he could be sitting anywhere. There's no physical border. It could be sitting anywhere in the world, and he could attack the government machineries or your personal data. So it's also the cyber attacks are in the victims are more a greater number of people than the convention attacks. The potential victim is impossible to regulate as enactment of planned attacks. Like it takes less physical training as compared to traditional warfare. And as I already mentioned, it serves as an important tool for communication to spread terroristic ideology. This is the cyberspace. The internet is the fastest way to spread any terror or panic through messages. What is the impact of cybercrime and terrorism? So the most severe impact we can see is the privacy violation. It's like your private data, your private private anything which is very much concerned and which is very much secret to you is violated, and it's a violation has attained a constitutional status both in domain of civil as in and respective laws. Then again, if the government data are stolen, like the government secrets, any which is very confidential and it's for concerning defense and other national security issues which the government is not willing to share, it's when it is shared with the media or the public, so it is very much alarming for the national security. Then the primary aim of all the cyber terrorists is to break down the communication system of the government, like to break down the e-governance ways, to break, like they can use a computer system to break down the traffic system, medical facility, educational facility, anything which could disturb the lives of the people, which could disturb break down the government, is very much make the government vulnerable, is the concern for the national security. India's from this type move to what are the initiative which has taken by Indian government. Earlier there was no as such laws related to cyber laws, but there was in the Information Technology Act. But after the 26/11 attack, the term cyber terrorism was added, and then there was the further amendment goes on with like 2006 amendment will added term e-governance, e-commerce, e-transaction. All if anything happens like in this cyber crime happened, then there is a law for it. Then there's a 2008 amendment which provided a more explanatory definition, like attacks on computer networks and critical information infrastructure. Then government also in 2013 released a national cyber security policy where there are many goals and many measures how to how the government adopted, the government as well as non-governmental bodies to counter the cyber crimes. And the CERT-IN was also formed in 2004, which is called a Computer Emergency Response Team, which is was to assist a law enforcing agency. The government has also approved setting up the National Cyber Coordination Center, and there's also a coordinator for it. Gulshan Rai was the first, and now Rajesh Pant is the cyber security coordinator. And in 2011, the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Sector was also set up to take effective measures on critical infrastructure and the key resources. So the most important duty was to safeguard and protect the country's information infrastructure.
Shalini, please conclude it.
Okay, sir. So even if there are so many agencies and laws, basically the future prospect is that there must be international coordination, and the government should work with all the non-government agencies like media, the people, academicians, scholars to tackle the cyber problem. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shalini, for concluding your presentation.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
And now invite Radha. She is a PhD research scholar at Central Institute of Haryana. She is going to speak on national security in the post-coronavirus pandemic era. So, Radha, I invite you to deliver your presentation. Radha.
Yes, sir. Good evening. Good evening, all. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah. You are.
Yeah, sir. First of all, sir, I want to express my gratitude towards the NICC and the chair S.K. Singh, sir, for facilitating me this opportunity for presenting my topic on this international platform. And I'm sharing my screen quickly. So as we have seen, the devastating COVID-19 pandemic has caused a vast level of morbidity and mortality and come of the whole world. And this makes the world to rethink again again about the scope of national security, which is my topic, national security in post-coronavirus pandemic era. And it has been argued that the infectious disease or the coronavirus can be weaponized by state or non-state actors. And the question arises here that is coronavirus pandemic change the definition of the national security, or how national security should be framed by the nations around the world in the post-coronavirus era? If we have seen that traditional security comprises usually the securing nations' integrity and sovereignty and the lives of its people and some international aspects. But we expand it further, then it will include the non-state actors where terrorism is at the top, and weapon of mass destruction, international organized crimes. At the same time, it should include infectious disease or pandemics too. So, because historically these pandemics and infectious disease have proved itself that they should be included in the national security issues, because humanity has been plagued by various infectious disease in past, and by analyzing this record, we should include it in the national security issues, because they cause more fatalities than a conventional war, as warned by the Joshua Lederberg, the Nobel laureate. In 1988, he warned that the microbe that fell in the child in a distant continent can reach yours today and see a global pandemic tomorrow. And at the same time, he said the single biggest threat to humanity's continued dominance on this planet is the virus. Similar case is with the COVID-19. According to the Wired Science report, the coronavirus originated in Wuhan Virology Lab, the People's Republic of China, and spread rapidly across the world. This virus was identified as the SARS-CoV-2 by the International Committee on Taxonomy of Virus and COVID-19 by WHO. So we have seen that COVID-19 is at its early stage and continuously mutated to new variants, which have been posed a challenge to the health scientists and experts. And it has been claimed more than 3 million lives across the world, and it's still counting. So despite having these despite having a huge catastrophic impact by these infectious disease, the infectious disease has not been recognized as a threat to the security until 2000. And on January 10, 2000, HIV/AIDS was declared as a threat to the international and national security in Africa by the United Nations Security Council. And this was the first time when the intricate relation between the infectious disease and the security has recognized. Not only by the United Nations, but Bill Clinton, President of the United States, too considered HIV/AIDS as a grave threat to the national security. And consequently, policymakers and scholars across the world consider the same. As per the report, infectious disease caused approximately 34% of the deaths, while conventional war and terrorist attack caused 0.64% of death across the world. And in 2020 and 2021, the COVID-19 pandemic caused by the coronavirus topped the cause for a large number of deaths across the world. With this, there has been a concern, there has been a great concern that these viruses and pandemics can be weaponized by the state or non-state actors. Because there is a class of weapons, that is the weapon of mass destruction like chemical, nuclear, or radiological weapons. The bioweapon is a subset of this larger class. Bioweapon uses infectious toxins and pathogens from living organisms, while entering in human body or animals causes death or disability. And they are infectious, that is why spread rapidly. And this will increase the risk of bioterrorism, because nuclear and chemical weapons are conventionally more expensive, not easily available or transported from one place to another place. They require technical expertise for assembly and operation. On the other hand, this biological weapon are easily accessible and can be transported to the desired location. And this makes them more appealing for the non-state actors or terrorists. Besides this, various countries across the globe, including USA, former USSR, Iraq, UK, Japan, China, North Korea, and Iran, were suspected to have biological weapon programs. And the Center for Disease Control and Prevention of the USA categorized high priority threat agent in category A. As we have seen in this table, category A, these agents have certain common properties to be exploited as a bioweapon. Now the question arises whether the SARS-CoV-2 virus share the same essential properties with category A threat agents. The answer is
Radha, sorry, I'm interrupting in between.
Yes,
Please
sir.
conclude it, please.
Okay, sir. So when we come to the national security concern in this area, generally poor and least developing countries used to suffer due to the spread of the disease. And here military capabilities are also being threatened. And if once the capability of an armed forces are compromised, how it will be able to protect the people of the country. And it is also concern that terrorist attacks may find out this opportunity to weaponize this virus, because they know how to weaponize it, and they can use the illness to infect masses, just like a lone wolf attack. So at this time, we need to transcend the traditional national security paradigm, which majorly focus on the wars and security of state. But we need an evolved national policy which redefines the relationship between state and citizen, and the planning approach should be reactive. Should be changed from reactive to proactive. And so a contemporary situation demands that the national security policy should be more responsive and must include security of its citizens against all threats like pandemics, climate change, food and water. So in my concluding remarks, we have observed that the coronavirus crossed the international borders and clearly jeopardized the national security of the countries, of many countries. So pandemic should be viewed in the lens of the human security, which is an essential component of national security. And simultaneously in this globalization era, single national policy could not be much effective. So international strategy and efforts are mandatory. That's it, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Radha. Now we are having this last presentation of this session. Parth. He is also PhD as a scholar of Central University of Haryana, and he is going to speak on climate change and nations, devastation and effects.
Okay, so without further ado, I'll start my presentation, which is on climate change and nations, about devastations and effects. So just with the startup, I would like to quote the case of Mozambique, which was hit by tropical cyclone Idai on 14th of March 2019, which led to internal displacement of around 146,000 people and destruction of more than 100,000 homes. Also, it also saw 1 million acres of crop got wasted and damage to infrastructure worth $1 billion. In a quick glance, let's understand climate change. So it is an unusual phenomena which sees the repeated occurrence of weather-related conditions unknown to specific place. It could be observed in the form of increase or decrease in rainfall, drought events, landslides, and heat waves, etc. Gro Harlem Brundtland, while speaking at the UN Commission on Sustainable Development in May 2007, made very clear that there can no longer be any doubt about human-induced climate change and its likely impact on the planet. Now moving on, we need to look at few recent climatic devastation which has happened just this year across the globe. Across the globe, not one nation has remained unaffected with the effects of climate change. Such is its nature that every part of the world has to pay a price for the deeds of other. The world has seen increased occurrence of natural disasters in the forms of floods, cyclones, landslides, and earthquakes. Now, starting with the first one, nations like Canada, Ghana, Nigeria, Sri Lanka, etc., have faced very severe flood events, whereas India, Mozambique, Philippines, Australia have faced severe cyclones. India in this year only have faced at least three cyclones in different parts and states of provinces. The nation of Japan, Myanmar, Burundi, Norway, etc. have faced landslides, massive landslides, and also earthquake has occurred in Haiti, Nepal, Iran, Ecuador, etc. Now moving ahead, the question which arises is, why do we need to pay attention to these events? Well, attention is desperately required because the above disasters can't be seen as solo or one-time lone events. Earth will see drastic reduction in access to clean water, increased food scarcity, agricultural degradation, and violent conflict emerging due to such events. Now, how is climate change going to affect nation? Well, the recently released assessment report by IPCC has not only reconfirmed the already known results, but has also brought to the forefront some more immediate and local specific data for the world. When talking about the natural repercussions due to climate change, Asia is going to witness increased annual precipitation and intense flood in North Asia, whereas South Asia is expected to see amplified droughts due to anthropogenic activities. Frequent landslides due to daily intense precipitation will be happening in East Asia along with tropical cyclones. Also, South Asia is going to witness very high intense heat waves and humid heat stresses. Talking about Africa, rate of surface temperature increase in Africa has been more rapid than global average. Also, frequency and intensity of heavy precipitation events are projected to increase almost everywhere in Africa. Moving on to small islands, there will be continued warming in 21st century due to human influence. Persistent increase in extreme heat and stress with future emissions and coastal inundation and saltwater intrusion in the inland freshwater stock is going to affect a lot of people. Many small island nations shall also be witnessing the shoreline threat along sandy coasts. Now talking about mountains and oceans. Freezing level height in mountain area is expected to rise. Warming has increased with the altitude in the Himalayas, the Swiss Alps, and Central Andes. Melting of glaciers has led to change in stream flow in mountain catchment areas. Also, snow cover will decline over most land regions during the 21st century. There will also be challenge for water supply, energy generation, ecotourism, and disaster preparedness at large. Further, there will be decrease in oxygen concentration due to anthropogenic warming to persist for thousands of years with the current state of emission. Also, global mean sea level is supposed to continue to rise for centuries due to mass loss from ice sheets and deep ocean heat uptake. Now talking about the human effects which we are going to face due to climate change. We can classify it into few broader concepts due to time constraint. I have just picked up few. For example, when talking about political and economic effects, we are going to say large scale human migration, both internal and international. Also, there will be emergence of environmental refugees. Also, talking about economic factors, like there will be joblessness, food insecurity, homelessness, loss of access to common property. Now talking about legal and administrative effects, there will be narrow scope of recognition for the environmental refugees, because the current refugee definition doesn't include environment as a factor of displacement. Now limited presence of relief organizations also affect a lot. Also, there is this slow and unresponsive attitude of policymakers towards the policy demands. Talking about social and geographical effects, there will be marginalization, social disintegration of masses. Also, there will be widespread habitat destruction and relocation. Few of those which I haven't mentioned in the slides are health and security, because huge number of displacement will see increased morbidity and mortality and outbreak of diseases. Also, Also, one cannot really rule out the happening of violence, ethnic conflict, and terrorist insurgents. Uh, moving on to my conclusions and suggestions. Uh, the least developed countries, small island developing states, and African countries are amongst the most vulnerable sections across the globe. According to New York Times report, it is estimated that the living conditions of 800 million people could seriously diminish across globe due to climate change. There is imminent need for thorough examination of climate change challenges. Also, the absence of multilateral strategy and legal framework must be answered to and addressed in an empathetic time-bound duration. The developed nations must provide technical assistance and training towards adaptation process, along with a must focus on combined practice of protection, retreat, and accommodation. Heavy emphasis should be paid on the mechanism like national adaptation programs for action. And also the need is felt for enhanced studies on governance of climate-induced migration as a separate and dedicated discipline. The focus on capacity and resilience building using indigenous and local area specific knowledge should be augmented so that the target population could be saved and made a part of the mission. To end this presentation, I would like to quote Desmond Tutu, as he has said that 25 years ago, people could be excused for not knowing much or doing much about climate change. Today, we
Okay.
have no excuse. Thank you, sir.
Okay, Parth, thank you. Thank you. So from the organizers, I'm just having a question. Should we have questions from audiences or not?
Sir, actually, we are running out of time, so I think we have to proceed to the next session.
Okay, no
We
problem.
apologize for the inconvenience. sir.
No, that's no problem. So if there's any question, you may send on your email ID. You may ask that question to basically organizers. They can convey that question to presenters. Later on, basically, we may have discussion on questions or queries. I have also noticed several questions from the presentations, but I'm stopping here. And finally, in one line, I could say like this session has justified this theme, basically non-traditional security issues, because it has elaborated different aspects, non-traditional issues like COVID-19. We have 2 papers in this session, which have elaborated the current, ongoing threat, non-traditional threat. At the same time, another paper, cybersecurity, which is also important, theme or issue basically we are talking about nowadays globally. And climate change. Definitely, that is another important aspect we are witnessing. We are having across the globe. As already Parth mentioned in his presentation, like every corner of the world is experiencing basically these kind of threats like drought, floods, these kind of things. And there's another presentation which was presented by basically Abhay, who tried to conceptualize the security issue, and definitely that is what we have to work on basically, because this is what I'm trying to say, like we have to think, rethink, and reconceptualize the entire concept of IR, because this is concept whenever we go into basically defining the concept in basically research method, what we find like this is something already defined, but this is not true. In last 30 years, we have tried to convey the world this message like there's nothing like fixed concept. Every concept gets changed in time to time. So we have to revisit the concept in this emerging situations. With these words, I'm stopping here, and definitely once again I extend my hearty thanks to basically organizers. Thanks a lot.